The Siege of Rhodes in 1522 was one of the most dramatic encounters between the Christian knights of the Order of St. John, better known as the Hospitallers, and the vast might of the Ottoman Empire under Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. It was a clash of civilizations, of ideologies, and of military strength that carried the echoes of the Crusades into the 16th century. By then, the crusading era had long faded, but the Hospitallers remained as one of the last surviving military orders of the medieval world. On their island fortress of Rhodes, they stood as a thorn in the side of the Ottomans, disrupting trade, raiding shipping routes, and providing a base for Christian fleets in the eastern Mediterranean. Rhodes was not only a military outpost but also a symbol of defiance, and the siege that came in 1522 would test the limits of human endurance, faith, and loyalty. The Hospitallers had settled in Rhodes after their loss of the Holy Land, transforming the island into a fortress bristling with towers, bastions, and thick stone walls. For more than 2 centuries, they fortified it against the inevitable clash with Muslim powers. Their population was small, numbering just a few thousand fighting men, including knights from across Europe, mercenaries, and local Greek inhabitants, but they were heavily armed, trained, and determined. The knights' code of chivalry and their religious mission gave them a sense of purpose that surpassed mere survival. They viewed themselves as the last guardians of Christendom in the East, and their stronghold represented a Christian bastion on the frontier of an expanding Muslim empire. On the other side stood Suleiman, young but already ambitious, leading a massive empire that stretched from Hungary to Arabia. He saw Rhodes as a critical obstacle to his naval supremacy. To secure the eastern Mediterranean, protect Ottoman trade, and prepare for campaigns further west, Rhodes had to be eliminated. For Suleiman, capturing Rhodes would also bring glory and secure his reputation as a formidable sultan early in his reign. The Ottoman preparations for the siege were immense. Contemporary chronicles describe an army of well over 100,000 men, including janissaries, cavalry, engineers, artillerymen, and sailors. A massive fleet of more than 400 ships carried troops and supplies to the island. Artillery was central to the Ottoman strategy. Cannons of enormous size were dragged across the sea and set up to pound the Hospitallers' defenses relentlessly. In contrast, the defenders numbered perhaps 7,000 at most, including about 600 knights, some mercenaries, and Greek militia. The disparity in manpower was overwhelming, yet the defenders believed in their walls, their faith, and their determination not to surrender. Grand Master Philippe Villiers de l'Isle Adam, a veteran knight, inspired loyalty among his men and prepared the city for the onslaught. The Hospitallers knew the Ottomans were coming and had stockpiled provisions, reinforced their walls, and drilled their troops for the defense. For them, the siege would not just be about holding territory, it would be a spiritual battle, a final stand of their order against overwhelming odds. The Ottomans landed in late June 1522 and quickly surrounded the city. Suleiman himself commanded the operation, demonstrating how important the conquest was to him personally. His commanders established camps, dug trenches, and deployed their artillery against different sections of the walls. The Hospitallers, divided into longs, or tongues according to their European origin, manned specific sections of the walls. Each long had responsibility for certain bastions, creating a sense of ownership and rivalry in defending their part of the fortress. The Ottomans unleashed their artillery bombardment in July, hammering the walls with thousands of cannonballs. Day and night, the thunder of artillery shook the city. Entire towers crumbled, walls collapsed, and breaches appeared. Yet the Hospitallers tirelessly repaired the defenses, filling gaps with earth, rubble, and timber. Women and children joined in the work, showing that the defense of Rhodes was not just the task of knights but of an entire community. Ottoman engineers employed sapping tactics, digging tunnels under the walls to place explosives and collapse them from below. The Hospitallers countered with countermines, digging their own tunnels to intercept the Ottoman efforts. Brutal underground combat ensued, with men fighting in narrow, suffocating passages, often in darkness, armed with daggers, torches, or even bare hands. Explosions rocked the city as mines were detonated, causing chaos and destruction, yet the defenders held firm. Repeated assaults followed, with waves of janissaries storming the breaches. These elite soldiers, renowned for their discipline and courage, threw themselves against the walls, climbing ladders under withering fire, only to be cut down by the defenders above. Boiling oil, Rocks, arrows, and gunfire rained down on them. The Hospitallers fought with fanatical bravery, rallying to push back every attack. Entire bastions were lost and then retaken in desperate counterattacks. The fighting was savage, close quarters, and unrelenting. Despite their valor, the defenders could not ignore the immense pressure. Their numbers dwindled, their supplies strained, and exhaustion set in. The Ottomans simply had too many men to throw into the fray, and each day the city's defenses weakened further. As the siege dragged into months, both sides suffered terrible casualties. Estimates suggest that tens of thousands of Ottomans perished in the assaults, while the defenders lost many knights and citizens. Disease spread in the cramped and filthy conditions, compounding the misery. The Hospitallers' morale was tested not only by death and destruction but also by the knowledge that no significant relief force would arrive from Europe. Despite appeals for aid, Christendom was divided, distracted by wars, politics, and the Reformation. Rhodes stood alone, yet its stand inspired admiration across Europe, even if concrete help was lacking. By December, after nearly 6 months of siege, the situation for the Hospitallers was dire. The walls were shattered in many places, their numbers reduced, and supplies nearly gone. The city was on the verge of collapse. Recognizing the futility of further resistance, Grand Master Leal Adam entered negotiations with Suleiman. Remarkably, Suleiman offered honorable terms of surrender. The defenders would be allowed to leave with their arms, banners, and possessions. Civilians who wished to stay would not be harmed, and those who wished to depart could do so. Suleiman respected the valor of his enemies and sought to avoid unnecessary bloodshed now that victory was assured. On December 22, 1522, the Hospitallers surrendered Rhodes. After 212 days of resistance, they marched out of their ruined fortress with dignity, accompanied by civilians who chose exile. Suleiman's respect for their courage was genuine, and he upheld his promises, ensuring that the Hospitallers were not massacred as was often the fate of defeated garrisons. The order eventually settled in Malta, where they would continue to play a role in Mediterranean conflicts, but Rhodes was lost forever. The fall of Rhodes had immense consequences. For the Ottomans, it was a triumph that secured their naval dominance in the eastern Mediterranean. With Rhodes in their hands, Ottoman fleets could move unchallenged, projecting power further west. For Christendom, it was a bitter loss, highlighting the divisions and weakness of European states. The Hospitallers' defense was celebrated as heroic, but it was also seen as a warning of the Ottoman threat that loomed over Europe. For the Hospitallers themselves, the siege became a defining moment of their legacy, symbolizing their courage, devotion, and willingness to sacrifice everything for their mission. The memory of the siege lived on in chronicles, songs, and legends. It was seen as a clash between David and Goliath, with the knights as the underdog resisting overwhelming force. The symbolism of their last stand resonated deeply in a world where religious conflict shaped politics and identity. Even centuries later, the Siege of Rhodes was remembered as one of the last echoes of the crusading spirit, a time when a small group of warriors stood against an empire in the name of faith and honor. The courage of the Hospitallers became part of the romanticized tradition of chivalry, while Suleiman's magnanimity added a note of respect between adversaries. The siege also revealed the changing nature of warfare. Cannons and gunpowder had transformed siegecraft, making even the strongest medieval fortresses vulnerable. No matter how brave the defenders, the sheer power of Ottoman artillery eventually broke through. The Hospitallers adapted, but the age of knightly warfare was fading, giving way to new realities of military technology and empire building. For the people of Rhodes, the siege was a tragedy but also a testament to resilience. The Greeks who lived on the island were caught between two worlds, supporting the Hospitallers but also enduring the arrival of the Ottomans. Their lives were transformed, their city changed, and their future tied to a new empire. For Europe, the loss of Rhodes was another step in the long struggle with the Ottomans, a struggle that would continue at sea in battles such as Lepanto and on land in sieges like Vienna. The Siege of Rhodes of 1522 stands as a dramatic turning point in this larger history, a story of faith and fire, of courage and collapse. It shows the endurance of a small community against overwhelming odds and the inevitability of change when empires collide. It is both an ending and a beginning. The end of Hospitaller Rhodes, but the beginning of their new chapter in Malta, where they would once again resist the Ottomans decades later. The story of the siege is more than just a military episode, it is a window into the human spirit. It shows how determination, unity, and belief can inspire resistance even when defeat is certain. It shows how even the mightiest armies must respect courage. And it reminds us that history is not only about victory but about how people face adversity with honor. The fall of Rhodes in 1522 was inevitable given the circumstances, but the way it unfolded ensured that it would be remembered for centuries. The Hospitallers may have lost their island, but they gained immortality in the annals of history. Suleiman gained his victory, but he also gained respect as a ruler who balanced ruthlessness with mercy. The island of Rhodes itself became a symbol of resilience, a place where East and West collided in fire and steel. In the end, the siege was not just a military contest but a drama of civilizations, one that still fascinates us today. Its lessons, of courage against odds and respect between enemies, remain as powerful now as they were 5 centuries ago. 1. The strategic importance of Rhodes as a Christian stronghold in the eastern Mediterranean. Rhodes was one of the most strategically important islands in the eastern Mediterranean during the early 16th century. Situated near the coast of Asia Minor, it commanded vital sea lanes between Constantinople, Egypt, and the Levant. For the Christian world, it served as a defensive bulwark against Ottoman expansion westward, as well as a base for raids and naval patrols against Muslim shipping. The island's harbors provided a safe haven for fleets, and its location made it a critical outpost for monitoring Ottoman naval activities. Rhodes was more than just a fortified city, it was a symbol of Christian resistance in a region increasingly dominated by the Ottomans. Losing Rhodes meant opening the seas to Ottoman supremacy, while holding it kept alive the hope that Christian powers might still project strength in the east. This made the island a constant point of tension between the Hospitallers and the Ottoman Empire. 2. The Hospitallers, origins, mission, and fortification of the island. The Knights Hospitaller, originally founded as a religious order in Jerusalem to care for pilgrims, transformed over the centuries into one of the most formidable military orders of Christendom. After losing the Holy Land and later Cyprus, the Hospitallers established themselves in Rhodes in 1309, turning the island into their new stronghold. Their mission was both charitable and martial. They continued to provide care for the sick while defending Christendom against Islamic expansion. Over 2 centuries, they fortified Rhodes with massive stone walls, towers, bastions, and moats, adapting to evolving siege technologies. The knights organized themselves into longs, or linguistic divisions, based on their European origins, each responsible for defending a section of the walls. Rhodes became a fortress monastery, where faith and arms combined. The Hospitallers, disciplined training, religious devotion, and formidable defenses made Rhodes a seemingly impregnable bastion, yet one constantly threatened by the growing power of the Ottoman Empire. 3. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent's motives for launching the siege. When Suleiman ascended the Ottoman throne in 1520, he inherited an empire already stretching across the Balkans, Anatolia, and much of the Middle East. To secure Ottoman naval dominance, he recognized that Rhodes posed a serious obstacle. From the island, the Hospitallers harassed Muslim shipping and disrupted trade routes between Constantinople and Egypt. Their presence threatened the safety of pilgrims traveling to Mecca and Medina. Moreover, conquering Rhodes would demonstrate Suleiman's power early in his reign and solidify his reputation as a leader equal to or greater than his predecessors. Beyond strategy, there was also prestige. Rhodes was a heavily fortified Christian stronghold, and taking it would send a message to Europe that Ottoman expansion was unstoppable. For Suleiman, the siege was not just about capturing territory, it was about projecting power, securing trade, and proving himself as the Magnificent, worthy of the empire's legacy of conquest and dominance. 4. The size and scale of the Ottoman army and navy compared to the small Hospitaller garrison. The disparity between the two forces could hardly have been greater. Contemporary sources describe the Ottoman force as numbering more than 100,000 men, supported by an enormous fleet of over 400 ships. Among them were elite janissaries, engineers, cavalry, and artillery specialists equipped with some of the most advanced siege cannons of the time. In contrast, the Hospitallers could muster only around 7,000 defenders, of which roughly 600 were knights. The rest included mercenaries, local Greek volunteers, and militia. The Ottomans had overwhelming superiority in manpower, firepower, and resources, while the Hospitallers relied on their fortifications, discipline, and morale. The imbalance turned Rhodes into a stage for one of history's most dramatic, last stands. While the Hospitallers fought with determination, they knew reinforcements from Europe were unlikely, leaving them to face a massive empire with only their walls, their faith, and their courage to shield them from annihilation. 5. The role of Grand Master Philippe Villiers de l'Isle-Adam in organizing the defense. At the heart of the defense stood Philippe Villiers de l'Isle-Adam, the Grand Master of the Order. A seasoned knight with decades of experience, he embodied the values of courage, honor, and steadfastness. His leadership during the siege was pivotal in maintaining morale among the defenders. L'Isle-Adam inspired loyalty and unity across knights of diverse European origins, ensuring they fought as one body despite differences in language and culture. He personally inspected the defenses, encouraged soldiers, and participated in decisions about counterattacks and fortifications. His resolve to defend Rhodes, to the last man, motivated the knights and civilians alike. Even in when the city was no longer defensible, L'Isle-Adam negotiated terms of surrender that preserved the knight's dignity, proving his wisdom matched his bravery. 6. The division of the city's defenses by longs of knights from different European regions. The Hospitallers organized their defense of Rhodes through the system of longs, or tongues, which divided the knights according to their country of origin. There were 8 longs, including those of France, Italy, Spain, Germany, and others. Each long was assigned to a specific bastion or section of the walls, making them responsible for maintaining and defending that area during the siege. This arrangement fostered both unity and rivalry, as knights took immense pride in holding their sector and competing to prove their valor. The French held the bastion of France, the Italians theirs, and so forth. When Ottoman bombardments weakened a wall, it was the knights of that long who bore the brunt of defending it. The system created cohesion while also ensuring accountability. It also turned the siege into a theater of pan-European resistance, with men from across the continent united in a desperate last stand. 7. The Ottomans' use of artillery bombardment and mining tactics to breach the walls. One of the decisive factors in the siege was the Ottomans' mastery of artillery and engineering. Massive cannons, some capable of firing stone balls weighing hundreds of pounds, were positioned against Rhodes' walls. Day after day, they pounded the bastions, reducing towers to rubble and creating gaping breaches. The psychological impact was devastating, as the relentless thunder of cannon fire shook the city and eroded morale. In addition to artillery, Ottoman engineers employed sapping and mining techniques. Tunnels were dug under the walls, filled with explosives or combustibles, and detonated to collapse the defenses. These tactics, combined with constant assaults, placed enormous pressure on the Hospitallers. Despite their strong walls, built over centuries, the defenders struggled to keep pace with the destructive power of gunpowder. The use of artillery and mining illustrated the transition from medieval to early modern warfare, where even the strongest fortresses could eventually be reduced. 8. The Hospitallers' countermines and desperate defensive strategies. To counter the Ottoman sappers, the Hospitallers employed countermines, digging their own tunnels to intercept or collapse Ottoman efforts. This led to brutal underground warfare, with men fighting in dark, narrow passages where visibility was low and suffocation was a constant threat. Battles in these tunnels were fought with daggers, torches, or even bare hands. Above ground, the Hospitallers patched up breaches using earth, rubble, and wooden structures, sometimes rebuilding defenses overnight after devastating bombardments. They poured boiling oil or water on attackers, hurled rocks, and used small firearms and crossbows to repel storming parties. Every man, woman, and child in the city contributed, with civilians carrying supplies, tending to the wounded, and helping to rebuild. These desperate measures bought precious time, but they could not offset the overwhelming numerical and technological superiority of the Ottomans. Still, the defenders' ingenuity and resilience became legendary in the annals of history. 9. Brutal hand-to-hand combat during repeated Ottoman assaults on the breaches. As the Ottoman bombardment created openings in the walls, repeated assaults followed. Janissaries and other elite troops stormed the breaches in waves, climbing ladders under heavy fire, determined to overwhelm the defenders. The Hospitallers met them with swords, pikes, and axes in close-quarters combat. Blood flowed in the rubble-strewn breaches as men fought hand-to-hand, often knee-deep in bodies. The defenders displayed extraordinary bravery, launching counterattacks to reclaim lost sections of the wall. Knights clad in heavy armor clashed with lightly equipped Ottoman infantry, while cries of battle echoed across the city. Casualties mounted on both sides, but the Ottomans could replace their losses while the Hospitallers could not. Despite their courage, the defenders were gradually worn down. The scenes of brutal combat highlighted the savagery of siege warfare, where neither side gave quarter and where every inch of ground was contested with ferocity unmatched on the open battlefield. 10. The involvement of civilians, including women and children, in the defense and repairs. The defense of Rhodes was not the work of knights alone. Civilians, men, women, and even children, played crucial roles. When the walls were breached by bombardment, civilians rushed to carry stones, rubble, and timber to rebuild them. Women prepared boiling liquids to hurl on attackers, tended to the wounded, and distributed food and water to exhausted defenders. Children served as messengers or helped carry supplies. The Greek population of the island, although not knights, stood alongside them in resisting the Ottomans, knowing that their fate was bound to the outcome of the siege. Their collective effort transformed the defense into a community struggle for survival. The bravery of ordinary people became part of the legend of the siege, showing that in moments of crisis, civilians could rise to the occasion with the same determination as soldiers. This unity gave the Hospitallers strength, even as their numbers dwindled. 11. The staggering casualties on both sides and the suffering caused by disease and exhaustion. The cost of the siege was immense. Contemporary accounts estimate that the Ottomans lost tens of thousands of soldiers in the repeated assaults, though exact figures vary. The Hospitallers, with their smaller numbers, could not sustain such losses, and every death was keenly felt. Exhaustion and lack of rest compounded their struggles, as men stood guard or fought for days without relief. Disease swept through both camps, fueled by cramped, unsanitary conditions and rotting corpses left unburied. Hunger gnawed at the defenders as supplies dwindled, while thirst tormented them during the hot Mediterranean summer. Civilians suffered alongside the knights, with little chance to escape the horrors around them. For the Ottomans, the siege was costly but manageable given their vast resources. For the Hospitallers, every casualty brought them closer to collapse. The suffering endured on both sides turned the siege into a tragedy of epic proportions, remembered for its human cost. 12. The lack of European reinforcements and the isolation of Rhodes during the siege. One of the most tragic elements of the siege was the Hospitallers' isolation. Despite appeals for aid, Europe was too divided and distracted to mount a serious relief effort. The Reformation was tearing Christendom apart, and rivalries among European powers prevented a united response. France and Spain were embroiled in their own conflicts, while the papacy lacked the resources to intervene. Rhodes, though admired, was ultimately sacrificed to geopolitical realities. Messages from the island brought pleas for assistance, but they went largely unanswered. The defenders knew they were alone, facing the might of the Ottoman Empire with no hope of reinforcements. This knowledge did not break their will but instead deepened their resolve to fight to the last. Their isolation became part of their legend, symbolizing not only their bravery but also the failure of Christendom to act in unity against a common threat. 13. The eventual collapse of the defenses and the negotiation of surrender terms. By December 1522, after 6 months of relentless bombardment and assault, the defenses of Rhodes were in ruins. Towers had collapsed, bastions lay in rubble, and the Hospitallers' numbers had been reduced to a fraction of their original strength. Grand Master Leal Adam faced the harsh reality that further resistance would mean total annihilation. Recognizing the futility of continued fighting, he opened negotiations with Sultan Suleiman. The discussions were conducted with dignity, and Suleiman, impressed by the defenders' courage, offered honorable terms. The Hospitallers would be allowed to leave with their arms, banners, and possessions, while civilians could choose to stay or depart. This was a remarkable act of clemency in an age when defeated garrisons were often massacred. The decision to surrender was painful but necessary, preserving the lives of survivors and allowing the order to continue its mission elsewhere, even if Rhodes was forever lost. 14. Suleiman's surprising decision to grant honorable terms to the Hospitallers. Suleiman's decision to offer honorable surrender terms was unusual for the time and demonstrated both pragmatism and magnanimity. Having achieved his objective, he recognized the futility of unnecessary bloodshed. The Hospitallers had fought with extraordinary bravery, earning even their enemies' respect. By granting them safe passage, Suleiman not only avoided further loss of life but also enhanced his own reputation as a just and noble ruler. Allowing the Hospitallers to depart with dignity ensured that news of his victory would resonate positively across Europe and the Muslim world. It was a political as well as a moral calculation, reinforcing his image as the Magnificent. For the Hospitallers, Suleiman's generosity was bittersweet. They had lost their home but preserved their lives and their honor. The episode underscored the paradox of war. Bitter enemies could still recognize valor in one another and engage with mutual respect even amid destruction. 15. The aftermath of the siege. The Hospitallers' exile, their move to Malta, and the wider impact. After leaving Rhodes in January 1523, the Hospitallers wandered for years in search of a new base. Finally, in 1530, they were granted Malta by Emperor Charles V, where they established themselves once more as guardians of the Mediterranean. From Malta, they would eventually face the Ottomans again in the famous Great Siege of 1565, where they achieved redemption by holding out successfully. The fall of Rhodes, however, had lasting consequences. It gave the Ottomans complete control of the eastern Mediterranean, enabling them to secure trade routes and expand naval operations. For Europe, the loss underscored the urgency of uniting against the Ottoman threat, though unity remained elusive. The Hospitallers' defiance became legendary, inspiring admiration even in defeat. The Siege of 1522 thus marked both an ending and a new beginning, the end of Hospitaller Rhodes, and the beginning of their storied chapter as the Knights of Malta.